"Come with me," the giant rancher said to the woman beaten for giving birth to 3 daughters. Crescent Ridge, Wyoming Territory, January 1879. The wind bore down from the peaks like a gale-powered piston, driving snowflakes horizontal and erasing a horse's hoofprints in seconds. The ridge stood empty and white, an endless slope of ice and silent trees bowing under the weight of winter's grip. At the crest of this frozen world, a figure sat tall on his horse, a dark shadow against the blizzard's glare. That was Boaz Kittredge. He was almost 2 meters tall, his frame carved like a statue from the rock of the hills. His broad shoulders filled the saddle. His arms hung thick with muscle, still carrying yellow scars from a dozen winters and cattle drives. His coat of buffalo leather looked small on him, though it was the largest in the county, but even it strained across his chest like a sail under full wind. He carried his rifle slung across the saddle and a bowie knife strapped at his side, but his presence alone spoke louder than any weapon. He had been tracking a mare lost in last night's storm, a gray with a white blaze, when the cry reached him. At first he thought it might be the wind howling through a hollow tree. Then he heard it again, fragile, urgent, the unmistakable sound of a newborn's wail cutting through the gale. Boaz clicked his tongue, signaled his horse, Titan, whose flaring nostrils expelled snow in ghostly puffs. Together they descended the slope, moving slowly, boots and hooves crunching in the half-frozen snow. The path was abandoned and raw, a scar in the white landscape. As they neared a timberline copse, the sound grew louder. 2 more infants cried, or whimpered, helpless against the wind. Then he found them. A fence post, half buried in snow and splintered at the top. Attached to it, a woman, barely upright, her arms bound behind her with rusted barbed wire, the metal cutting into her pale skin where the snow had stung and froze. Her dress was ripped to shreds, a nightgown once maybe white, now brown with dirt and stained with dried blood. Her hair, like spun wheat, stuck to her face in icy clumps. Her cheeks bore bruises blooming violet, her lips cracked and gray-blue. At the base of the post lay 3 infants, bundled in nothing but tattered blankets, faces reddened with cold, their tiny fists curled and pale. She moaned, half-conscious. Don't let them take my daughters." Her voice cracked. Boaz dismounted with deliberate grace, setting Titan's reins into a thick handful and kneeling beside the children. He removed his gloves, hands enormous, scarred, capable of crushing rock or calming prey, and checked the babies, their chests rising, shallow, but rising. He placed a giant hand under the smallest's head, watched for breathing, and nodded. Then he looked at the woman, reached for the wire, and used his knife to free her arms. The wire had cut deep into flesh. Blood welled where he cut. She made no sound. He rose, hoisted the woman onto his shoulder like one might carry a sack, his muscles rippling under coat and shirt. The mare toddlers he tucked in his saddle pack, one in the coat across his chest, 2 under the wool blanket slung around him. The wind blamed him, no longer hammering against the wall of snow but buffeting the 3 children and the giant rancher together in one bundle of motion through the storm. Titan stormed uphill, each step a triumph of metal-shod hoof over frozen slide. Boaz wrapped his greatcoat tighter, positioned the children, and spoke in a voice low and steady. "Come with me." That was all. No question, no apology, no hesitation. And in the swirling white, with the mountain howling around them and the woman leaning against his rugged form, the frozen landscape seemed to give way just enough for hope to warm. The wind howled against the shutters as Boaz Kittredge leaned into the door and shouldered it closed. Snow spilled onto the hardwood floor in a rush of white, swirling like ash before settling at his boots. Inside the cabin, the cold clung to the air like a second skin. It was a plain place, 4 walls of weathered pine. The ceiling sloped downward with age, beams dark with soot from winters past. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor. Just a stone hearth at the far wall, a table with 2 chairs, and a cot tucked near the fire. 3 pegs by the door held a coat, a rifle, and a wide-brimmed hat. Nothing more. Boaz laid the woman on the cot with a slowness that belied his size. Her head lolled to one side, mouth parted. The babies came next, carefully, gently. He set them in a wicker basket lined with old sheepskin. One stirred, letting out a low, mewling whimper. He tucked the blankets tighter around them. Without pausing, he turned to the hearth. The fire had long since died out. He crouched and stacked kindling with methodical hands. A flint spark caught. Soon flames crackled in the silence, casting gold light over the worn walls. Boaz moved to the small shelf above the table, took down a glass jug of goat's milk, and set it near the fire to warm. Then he retrieved a small wooden spoon from a box tucked behind the stove. Its edges were worn smooth, the handle dark from use. He had carved it 6 years ago for a niece who never lived long enough to hold it. He returned to the basket, dipped the spoon into the warm milk, and brought it to the lips of the smallest girl. Her mouth opened instinctively, suckled clumsily, then greedily. He fed each one in turn, wiping their lips with the sleeve of his coat, checking their breath, adjusting their blankets. Only when they were quiet again did he turn back to the woman. Her skin was ghost pale, her cheeks smeared with bruises. Dried blood crusted at her hairline and along her wrists. Boaz took a cloth, dipped it in warm water from a tin basin, and began to clean the blood from her hands. She didn't stir. He worked slowly, as if touching something sacred. He ran the cloth along her arms, careful of the torn skin where the wire had bitten deep. He wrapped her wrists in strips of clean linen, his fingers moving with the precision of someone used to damage. He paused, then rose to fetch a second blanket from a chest near the wall, an old elk-hide quilt lined with fur. He draped it over her form, pulling it up to her chin. She was still so cold. He went back to the fire, sat there for a long while, legs stretched out, palms resting on his thighs. A sound behind him broke the quiet, a rasp, like breath forced through broken glass. He turned. The woman's eyes fluttered open, only slightly. Her lips moved. "I did everything right," she whispered. "I stayed quiet. I cooked. I prayed. I smiled." Her voice cracked. She closed her eyes again, but tears escaped, slipping down her temples. "What did I do wrong, to be punished, for bringing angels into the world?" Boaz said nothing. He stood, walked to the back wall where his axe leaned against the frame, and took it down. With measured steps, he moved to the woodpile in the corner. There, in the dim light of the fire, he began splitting, kindling. The sound of blade meeting grain echoed like punctuation in the silence. Each strike said what he did not. "You are not alone. You are not worthless. You are not wrong." Her breathing steadied. And still, Boaz did not look back. He just kept splitting wood, feeding the fire, and letting the warmth return to a cabin that had forgotten how to hold more than one life at a time. The wind outside had softened into a low murmur, brushing the cabin walls like a ghost that had lost interest. Inside, the fire had eaten through most of the kindling, casting a sleepy glow over the rough-hewn floor. Boaz Kittredge sat near the hearth, sharpening a blade in slow, deliberate strokes. The rhythm was steady. So was his silence. Nora Whitlock stirred. Her fingers flexed over the edge of the quilt, bruises still vivid against her pale skin. Her lips parted like they had forgotten how to form sound. Boaz didn't look up. He kept working the blade. "I married Chester Whitlock," she said softly. "I was 17. He was a widower, rich, respected, a God-fearing man." Boaz said nothing, but the whetstone stilled. "My father said I was lucky." Her eyes didn't focus on anything in the room. "I thought so too. At first, Chester wore suits to Sunday service. He said grace before every meal. But—" she swallowed. Her voice cracked. "He never smiled unless it was for show. He never touched me unless it was to correct. And when I bore him daughters, first one, then another, his mouth became a line, his fists less patient." Boaz set the blade aside, stood, and began tending the fire. Nora continued, her voice thin. When Clara came, the third girl, his mother called me cursed, said I had turned my womb against God, that I'd failed my role as a wife, as a woman. The flames rose higher, crackling as pine sap caught. They said I was spoiled milk, said I'd made their name small. Chester told the preacher I was a trial, and that trials make men holy. Then he beat me, in front of his brothers, called it a ritual of correction. Boaz knelt near the hearth, feeding more logs into the blaze. Nora's breath trembled. He tied me to the old fence post before sundown. Said if I was meant to live, God would spare me, left me with nothing but their names. She turned her head slightly, gaze searching for the basket, where the babies now lay bundled in fur, asleep in fragile peace. They'll come back, she said. Panic crept in behind the whisper. They'll say I stole them, that I'm mad. They'll take them from me. Boaz stood, his height filled the space, a towering wall of quiet strength. No one takes anyone's child, he said, on my land. She looked up at him, eyes red, mouth trembling. No one had spoken to her like that, not her father, not her husband, not anyone. He turned away without waiting for thanks. Later, as she drifted into a shallow, exhausted sleep, the sound of carving echoed in the cabin, slow, precise, the scrape of steel on cedar. Hours passed. The babies woke and fed, and still Boaz carved. At dawn, the sun barely rose behind thick clouds, casting silver light through the slats. When Nora awoke, the basket of fur had changed. Above it, hanging from a bent nail driven into the wall, were 3 wooden plaques, smooth cedar, hand-sanded and oiled until they gleamed faintly in the firelight. Each one bore a name, neatly carved: June, Clara, Belle. She pressed a hand to her mouth. No one, no midwife, no neighbor, no kin, had ever spoken her daughters' names with care, let alone carved them into permanence. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't sob, she couldn't, but her chest trembled. Boaz didn't comment. He sat on the porch outside, his axe leaning against one thigh, eyes on the horizon. Inside, the fire cracked quietly. And for the first time since the storm, the cabin didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like the start of something unspoken, something strong, something rooted. The wind had changed. Boaz felt it before the clouds did, low and restless, the kind that swept in from the valley with news on its back. He stood outside the cabin, splitting logs, when the sound of hooves reached his ears. A single rider, steady, familiar. He didn't look up right away, he didn't need to. Hester McCoy reined her mule to a stop just beyond the porch. Her frame was small, wrapped in a brown wool coat patched at the elbows, but her eyes, sharp as a whetstone, missed nothing. "You gonna let an old woman freeze?" she called, voice dry as creekstone. Boaz opened the door. Inside, the fire was burning low, casting orange shadows on the walls. Nora sat on a stool near the hearth, rocking Belle, her gaze wary. Hester removed her gloves and walked straight in, brushing the snow from her skirts. Her eyes landed on Nora, then on the 3 tiny heads nestled in the fur-lined cradle. "So it's true," she murmured. Nora tensed. "What is?" Hester turned to Boaz. "He's telling folks she went mad, that she ran off with the girls and tried to drown 'em in the river, said he's sending men to bring her back." Nora's breath caught. Her arms tightened around Belle. Boaz didn't move, didn't blink. "They left town at first light," Hester added. 3 of 'em, not the kind that knocks politely. The silence in the cabin thickened. Boaz walked past both women, opened the trunk at the foot of his cot, and began pulling out old pelts. He said nothing. Hester sighed. "You gonna say anything, Bo?" He didn't answer, just gathered a hammer, nails, and a coil of wire. By nightfall, the cabin had changed. Boaz had reinforced the door with a second crossbar. The windows were now lined with elk hide, pinned to the frame to trap heat. The pantry shelves, once sparse, were full. Jars of beans, salt pork, dried apples. A second saddle sat beside his own, freshly oiled. He hadn't spoken a single word of the preparations. It was only when Nora found him at the rear of the cabin, lifting a false floor in the woodshed, that she broke the quiet. "You're building a hiding place," she said. Boaz didn't look up. He was laying down fur, thick strips of wolf pelt against the cold earth. "For the girls," he replied simply. She knelt beside him. The wind whistled through a crack in the boards above. "You don't even know me." Boaz paused. He set down the last pelt and turned. Nora's eyes were wide, the firelight catching in their corners. "You're not afraid of what happens if they find you harboring me?" He looked at her for a long moment, not with pity, not even with concern, just clarity. "I don't save people to stay safe," he said. "I save 'em because I can't stand the thought of someone being left behind." Nora's breath shook. In that space between words, something passed between them, not yet love, but recognition, a knowing, that her life, ragged and raw as it was, mattered here, on this mountain, in this house, to this man. That night, Boaz worked by lantern light. He stowed more food in the root cellar, tacked down fresh snowshoes, packed a satchel with dried meat and a tin of matches. He checked the rifle twice. And when the wind from the valley rose again, colder and crueler, he stood at the window, watching, waiting, not for trouble, but for the chance to face it on his own terms. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing the ridge like a grave cloth, still and untouched, until hoofbeats tore through the silence. 3 riders climbed the path from the valley below. In front rode Chester Whitlock, mustache trimmed, gloves spotless, but his eyes were ice. Behind him, 2 hired guns, one short and thick-set, the other tall, limping, with a jagged scar across his brow. They looked like men who didn't wait for permission to shoot. Inside the cabin, Nora clutched June and Clara close. Belle slept in a basket near the hearth. Her breath caught with every hoofbeat. She didn't need to look. She knew who it was. Boaz had seen them from the hill. He walked down toward the cabin slowly, deliberately. He left the rifle where it was. No panic, just purpose. Chester reined in 10 paces from the porch. Boaz stepped out. The giant rancher filled the doorway like a wall of stone, broad shoulders squared, hands relaxed but ready. His face was unreadable. "Boaz Kittredge," Chester said with a smile like frostbite. "I'm here for what's mine." Boaz said nothing. "My wife," Chester continued, "and my daughters, the law says they belong to me." He pulled out a folded paper. "Judge Mortimer's order. She's unfit, hysterical. I'm their legal guardian." Still no movement. "She ran off, tried to drown them in the river," Chester added smoothly. "But I forgive her. I'm taking them home." No reaction. Chester's smile faded. The shorter gunman stepped forward. "You deaf giant?" Boaz stepped off the porch. The snow crunched under his boots. "I heard," he said. The scarred man struck him hard with a rifle butt to the shoulder. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Boaz staggered, blood spreading across his shirt. His left arm fell limp, dislocated, but he didn't fall. He didn't strike back. "Still standing?" the shorter one sneered. Chester dismounted and walked forward, pistol drawn. "Last chance, Kittredge. Move. She's mine. She always was." Boaz met his eyes. His breath came hard, jaw clenched, but his voice was clear. "She was never yours," he said, "and sure as hell not now. She married me." "And you left her in the snow like a dog," Boaz growled. "You chose death for her. I chose life." Behind them, hooves pounded the ground. Hester McCoy rode in, skirts flying, face set like iron. 2 more followed, 1 deputy and the sheriff himself, a silver star gleaming on his chest. "Drop the gun, Whitlock!" Sheriff Elgin shouted, rifle aimed. Chester turned, startled. "She told me everything," Hester snapped, dismounting. "You beat her senseless and left her to freeze. That's attempted murder." "You can't prove," Chester began. "We can," the sheriff interrupted. "Sworn testimony, wire marks, bruises, frozen children. Now drop it." Chester hesitated, then tossed the pistol into the snow. The deputies rushed in, handcuffs snapped shut. One gunman resisted, but a quick elbow silenced him. They were dragged down the trail. Boaz stood still, blood dripping from his shoulder. His eyes never left Chester until the last man vanished into the trees. Only then did he exhale. Hester stepped beside him. "You all right?" "Shoulders out," he muttered. "Had worse." Inside the doorway, Nora stood motionless, eyes wet with tears. For the first time since morning, she moved. Barefoot, she stepped onto the porch, down through the cold snow, and stopped before Boaz. "You didn't even raise a hand," she whispered. He looked down at her, blood on his collar, but eyes soft. "Didn't need to," he said. The truth was heavier than fists. She leaned into him, not out of pity, not out of fear, but something deeper. Gratitude, trust. The beginning of something that could last. Behind them, the cabin stood quiet, and for the first time in years, it felt like home. The days passed slow and golden beneath the melting frost. The ridge, once choked in snow, began to breathe again. Trees sighed with thaw, and the roof of the cabin no longer groaned under white weight. Inside, a different kind of warmth bloomed. Boaz's shoulder had to be reset. It was Nora who did it, quiet, firm, with a strip of boiled leather between his teeth and a prayer whispered under her breath. He didn't scream. He just nodded once, sweat glistening at his temple. Each morning after, she cleaned the wound. Fresh cloth, clean water, a paste of wild onion and bear fat. He never flinched, not even when her fingers brushed too close to bone. The girls grew stronger. Belle giggled now. Clara reached for her mother's braids. June clutched a pine twig like it was a doll. They slept on furs beside the hearth, and Nora sang to them with a voice that cracked but didn't break. She found the box by accident. It was behind the firewood stack, small, square, carved from walnut, the edges smoothed by years of being touched and left untouched. She opened it slowly. Inside, a folded handkerchief, faded blue, embroidered in fine script, Adeline. Nora didn't breathe for a moment. The name felt like a door she wasn't meant to open. She folded it back carefully and set the box where she found it. But that night, when Boaz sat by the fire sharpening his skinning knife, she turned to him and asked softly, "Who was she?" Boaz didn't answer at first. He rubbed the whetstone along the blade, slow and even. Then he said, "A long time ago." Nora didn't press. 2 days later, as she changed the dressing on his shoulder, she finally asked, "Why me?" He looked at her, not startled, just quiet. She met his gaze without flinching. "Why did you choose me? You could have ridden away. You could have taken the babies to town and washed your hands of it. But you didn't." Boaz breathed deep. The fire cracked behind him. "Because you never asked for anything," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse. "You didn't beg. You didn't lie. You didn't run from what happened. You just wanted to live. And I." He paused. "I wanted to protect something that didn't try to hide." She looked down at his bandaged shoulder, then up again. "That's not nothing," he added. Silence sat between them for a long while, not heavy, but full. Then he said almost to himself, "I've seen plenty of women want to be saved, but not many who want to survive first." Nora smiled, small and sad. "And what happened to her?" she asked gently. "Adeline." Boaz exhaled, leaning back in the chair. "She loved the man I might have been, not the one I am now. She left before the snow fell that year, took her silk dresses and her soft hands, and followed the preacher's son to Street Louis." He looked into the fire, but his eyes weren't bitter, just remembering. "I kept the cloth because it was the last time I thought love meant being chosen." Nora reached across the small table and touched his hand, rough, calloused, large enough to hold all 3 of her daughters at once. "I didn't choose either," she said softly. "I was taken, handed off, owned. I didn't choose until I opened my eyes under the snow and saw you." Boaz looked up at her. "You weren't supposed to be there," she said. "And yet," he murmured. They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. Outside, the ridge exhaled as winter receded. Inside, the hearth burned slow and sure, and between two people who had never asked to be saved, something strong began to take root, not from rescue, not from promises, but from the quiet decision to stay. Summer light filtered through the tall pines, dappling the dust floor of the stable where Boaz Kittredge worked. The scent of sawdust, leather, and warm horses filled the air, mingling with the steady rhythm of hammer against nail. The old barn had buckled under winter snow, but Boaz was rebuilding it beam by beam, not just shelter, but welcome. He wore no shirt in the heat, and sweat streaked his back, but his movements were slow and sure. His hands, massive and scarred, shaped wood like it remembered what it meant to serve people, not just stand. Nora Whitlock sat nearby, mending his coat by hand. She worked slowly, each stitch deliberate. Her fingers weren't soft, not anymore, but they moved with care. The coat lay across her knees, and she glanced now and then at the man who wore it, quietly learning him in daylight. Their 3 daughters played in the grass. June, Clara, Belle. The names still felt new. Their laughter echoed off the wood beams, filling every crack of silence with joy. At one point, they ran to Boaz, clung to his boots, and called him something Nora hadn't taught them. Pa. Boaz froze, then looked down. His face didn't change much, but something behind his eyes softened. He crouched, lifted Clara onto one shoulder, and let Belle cling to his side. June held his hand like she'd done it 1,000 times. Later, when the sun dipped low and the light turned honeyed, Boaz rummaged in his workbench. He pulled out a small box and returned to the porch where Nora sat. Without a word, he placed something in her palm. A wooden bead chain. Each bead smooth and warm, carved with care. June, Clara, Belle. The last bead bore a heart, inside it, a single letter, N. Nora stared at it, her fingers trembling. "You made this?" she asked. He nodded. "For them, and for you." Her throat tightened. "They call you Pa," she whispered. "I've never heard them call anyone that." He met her eyes. "They do now." She looked out over the trail, where pines cast long shadows. "I've never been chosen," she said softly. "Not by my family, not by anyone." He didn't answer, just reached out, wrapped her hand in his, so large it covered hers entirely. "Now you are," he said. Nora turned her face into his shoulder, the beads pressed between them. The children's voices danced in the air like wind chimes, light and living. She let herself breathe deep, the scent of pine, wood smoke, and something quieter, peace. As dusk came, the stable doors creaked gently. Inside, a man from Missouri unrolled his bedroll. A couple from Dakota lit a lantern. The house on the ridge had become a place people looked for when the road got too long. Nora stood, brushing her apron. "If I left, would you stop me?" Boaz didn't rise at first. Then he stood to his full height, cast in silhouette against the soft gold of sundown. His shadow stretched long across the ground. "I wouldn't let you go," he said quietly. "Not now, not ever." She stepped into his arms without hesitation. He folded them around her, arms strong enough to break wild horses, now holding something far more fragile. The girls came tumbling from under the apple tree, dragging sticks and trailing giggles. Belle tripped and laughed. June tried to catch a firefly. Clara held up a pine cone, like it was gold. Nora looked up at Boaz and smiled, not the kind that says life is easy, but the kind that says, we're still here. Night settled gently over the ridge. Inside, the hearth crackled. Boots lay by the door. Above it, 3 hats hung, 2 too small to be useful, 1 full of dust and dignity. Boaz and Nora sat on the steps. The bead chain lay between them. She traced each name like a prayer. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. He just held her hand, firm and still. And when the stars appeared, he reached for a plank of cedar and his carving knife, already shaping the next thing their life might